My son got into a fight and I was called to school. Unexpectedly. The instructor is my long-dead husband. 5 years after we broke up and you already have a child? You're really something. There's no way. The child's father is a scumbag. After getting married, he faked his death and left the child to me. The stepmother. In a fit of anger, the truth slipped out. The entire playground fell silent. Me. Before I could explain, my ex-husband got even angrier. You'd rather be a stepmother to someone else than marry me. Rana. You've got guts. Me. This is your son. Are you stupid? Have you lost your memory? The moment I saw the instructor, I was almost scared silly. What's going on? The dead ghost who was buried at sea is now alive. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. It's an illusion. All illusions. It must just be someone who looks similar. As I thought this, I took a deep breath and reached out, trembling. Instructor. I'm really sorry. Nice to meet you. My child has caused you trouble on our first meeting. I thought I was polite and cautious. The instructor surely wouldn't hold it against me. But the instructor sneered. First meeting? I was slightly stunned. He ignored the crowd and walked over step by step, leaning down. His familiar handsome face was extremely close to me. The faint scent of soap was fragrant. But at this moment, I felt extremely pressured. He stared at me, his face cold. When his thin lips parted, he enunciated each word. Rana. 5 years after we broke up, your son is about to start primary school? Don't you have an explanation? Explain what? I was confused. Then my body stiffened, and my face turned pale in an instant. Is he Sid? Sid isn't dead? I looked around in horror, longing to find some comfort from others. Unfortunately, people's joys and sorrows are not shared. I was alone, trembling in fear, while the instructors around all looked over one after another, their faces full of gossipy expressions. 5 years after breaking up? A child starting primary school? Boss. Have you been cuckolded? The tones were more and more excited one after another. But it directly woke me up. Yes, 5 years after breaking up. And the child is about to start primary school. Does this sound absurd? But this child isn't my biological one. I, a beautiful young woman in my early 20s, became a sucker. Why does the child's real father start questioning me now? Is there any justice? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Before I could open my mouth to refute, I heard his cold and angry voice. Did you teach your son the fighting skills I taught you? Rana. You've got guts. I held my son and glared fiercely at Sid. Scumbag. I raised his son for 3 years, being both a father and a mother. This person still misunderstands that I taught my son to fight? This was clearly taught by him before he died. My chest was filled with rage. Without thinking, I retorted directly. My son is genetically talented in fighting. Don't wrongly accuse me. More gazes fell on me. Feeling those gossipy gazes, I didn't have time to think too much. I quickly coughed awkwardly twice and tried to make up for it. After all, my dear son still has to participate in the summer camp here. Instructor. What I mean is that when the child is in your hands, if he makes a mistake, you can just educate him directly. Sid raised an eyebrow and looked at me, his eyes still carrying an indescribable coldness. I was puzzled. I'm raising your child for you. Why are you still looking at me coldly? But probably because I was used to it when we were in love. As soon as Sid looked at me like this, I would feel guilty and my legs would go weak. Then, instructor, if there's nothing else, I'll leave first. This child already knows he's wrong. The moment I escaped Sid's sight, I felt completely relieved. However, 10 minutes later, I came back again. This training ground is so big that I can't find the way out. When I returned to the office, I just happened to hear other instructors gossiping. Lao Zhang. You're amazing. Ex-girlfriend? Just now you said it's up to you. Isn't that child yours? Sid looked at the people who were speaking with an expressionless face, and spat out two words softly. No. Me. Who was eavesdropping? He doesn't even recognize his own child. What kind of ultimate scumbag is this? I was so angry that I turned to leave, but was spotted by other instructors with sharp eyes. As soon as others shouted, Sid frowned and walked towards me slowly. In a secluded place, Sid stood with his arms crossed, looking down at me. I don't know if it was an illusion, but it seemed that I saw the corners of his mouth curl up slightly, as if he was in a good mood. Want to explain to me? Speak. Me. Explain your big head. I suppressed the urge to roll my eyes and put forward my request. Instructor Zhang. I can't find the way out. Can you trouble to send me out? In an instant, Sid's face sank again. 5 years have passed, and you haven't made any progress at all. Sid left this sentence and strode forward. I followed closely behind and grumbled. My progress is not in finding my way. It's all in raising his child for him. Sid. Can you walk slower? Sid has long arms and legs. Every time I walked with him, I felt like I had to run. When we were in love, as soon as I shouted like this, Sid would stop and hold my hand. But now, Sid's body stiff and slightly, and he glanced at me sideways. Can't you run? Troublesome. I made faces behind him. No way. I deliberately slowed down. But looking at the shrinking distance ahead, I couldn't help but pout. At least Sid still has a little bit of conscience. Sid. What are you thinking about our son? As we reached the school gate, and he still hadn't said anything, I couldn't help but ask. I asked very sincerely. Unfortunately, he didn't even give me a glance and just turned and left. Is this angry? I was completely shocked. I'm not even angry. Why is he angry? So strange. I have a deep connection with Sid. We were together since our school days. Later, because I was young and ignorant, I insisted on breaking up with him because of some small things. At that time, Sid had backbone and went to join the army right away. 2 years later, he came back and blocked me downstairs directly. He looked at me fiercely and said in the toughest tone the most pitiful words. Mana. Can we make up? Don't force me to beg you. Then we made up. The night I moved into his house, I saw a 2-year-old toddler in his house stumbling towards Sid. Daddy. Daddy. I was stunned. But Sid calmly put his arm around me and explained. This child doesn't have a mother. And he's not. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by a hurried phone call. Later, he looked urgent, picked up his things and was about to leave. Before leaving, he also said that he would explain it to me properly when he came back. I waited and waited. In the end, I waited for the news that he had a car accident and was buried at sea. I didn't believe it. I spent a lot of money to find someone to search for the corpse in the sea. For 3 whole months, nothing was found. In the end, I took the toddler with me and became a stepmother in such a muddled way. After returning home, I couldn't help but complain to my best friend. Sid recognized me as his ex-girlfriend. Why doesn't he recognize his own son? And he had an expression as if I had cuckolded him? My best friend analyzed together. Could it be? He's embarrassed to admit it in front of so many colleagues? Makes sense. But now that Key's real father is there, you don't have to worry about him being in the summer camp. I nodded silently. But as soon as I heard the words real father, I still felt a bit uncomfortable. Sid left in a hurry. I didn't know what the child's name was. Later, I simply named him Key, praying that one day a miracle would happen and Sid would come back safely. But when he suddenly appeared in front of me without warning, I realized. Sid seems to have changed. He would never have looked at me with such a cold gaze before. Seeing that I didn't speak, my best friend waved her hand in front of my eyes again. What are you thinking? When Sid left back then, you were so worried that you couldn't eat or sleep. You got seriously ill and were hospitalized several times. Now that he's back, Can't you? My best friend put her two thumbs together and touched each other. She also smiled and nudged me with her shoulder. I frowned slightly and didn't speak. After 3 years, Sid is still as handsome and tall as before. Even after being polished by time. He is even better than before. But anyway, he has a son. If he died, it's fine for me to be a stepmother. If he comes back alive, I seem to be a bit unable to accept it. Making up with him? Moreover, I always feel that there's something wrong with Sid. After listening to my best friend's words, I thought Sid was just embarrassed to recognize his own son because of his colleagues. So I didn't worry much about my son during the 2 weeks of the summer camp. But when I saw my skinny son at the closing ceremony of the summer camp, as a stepmother, I almost didn't recognize him. Mommy, I want to go home. As soon as my dear son saw me, he burst into tears. The child was crying with snot and tears. I held my son and looked at Sid not far away. I was at a loss and stood still. No way. Deliberately training his own son so harshly. But when I saw a class of black-skinned kids, I felt a little relieved. Okay. At least it's not targeted revenge. After the closing ceremony, parents all took pictures with their children and instructors. After all, the instructors who can appear here all have some background. If a child catches the eye of any instructor, the child's future path will be much easier. But I'm different. I picked up my son and was about to leave directly. But just as I took a step, I heard a parent say in a matchmaker's tone, "Instructor Zhang, you are so young, handsome, and have good conditions. Do you have a girlfriend? Can I introduce my cousin to you?" Hey, my leg won't listen to me. Why can't I walk now? Mommy, let's hurry up. I covered my dear son's mouth. Don't talk. Mommy is investigating your real father's situation. Sid was only 2 meters away from me. I listened sideways. Somehow, I felt that cold gaze seem to sweep over me several times. I couldn't help but clench my fist. Look at what? Hurry up and answer. No need. Thank you. That's more like it. The parent left disappointed. I hummed a tune smugly. Just as I was about to leave, I found that Sid blocked me. The hummed tune stopped abruptly. I felt inexplicably guilty. Is there something? Sid raised an eyebrow. This seems like a question I should ask you, right? Was I caught eavesdropping? I was looking for an excuse while rolling my eyes. But I didn't expect my dear son's mouth to be so loose. Instructor. Just now Mummy said that she was investigating my real father's situation. It was too late for me to cover his mouth. Sid's dark eyes were full of inquiry and a dangerous meaning. Just as I was about to run away, Sid grabbed my wrist. Want me to be a sucker dad? Reina, you really have the ability. Sid was extremely eye-catching among the instructors. Originally, he was already attracting a lot of attention. As soon as he pulled me like this, many people immediately looked over. I explained with an embarrassed smile. Everyone, don't misunderstand. We're resolving some family matters. Sid responded quickly. After saying that, he directly pulled me and walked out. Mikey walked slowly and was almost trotting. As a stepmother, I felt sorry for him. So I simply stopped. Sid, where are you going now? He can't keep up with you. Men are really not good. They don't have any heart for their children at all. Sid looked at me steadily and pursed his thin lips without speaking. In the next second, he suddenly bent down and picked up the child. Can we go now? Sid held the child in one arm and pulled my wrist with the other. I followed numbly behind, looking at my dear son wrapping his arms around Sid's neck. My eyes unconsciously reddened. God knows how many times I fantasized about this scene. After arriving at the parking lot, Sid directly put the child in the car. Hey! Before I could finish, the car door slammed shut. Sid leaned against the car door and looked at me steadily. Tell me, what's going on? I was so angry that I laughed. How dare you ask me back? You can still laugh. Sid took 2 steps forward and got closer. The corners of his lips were tight and the veins on his forehead were faintly visible. Raina. As soon as I went to join the army. You had a child. Shouldn't you explain it to me? I pointed at the child in the car in shock. My mouth wide open. How did you learn to lie when you joined the army? This child was clearly left to me by you. I'm the child's stepmother. Okay. Now it was Sid's turn to have a complicated expression. After hesitating for a moment, I still took the opportunity to ask. Back then, weren't you buried in the sea? When mentioning the past, I still couldn't help but have red eyes. Not long after we were together, Sid had an accident. I didn't even have time to be happy properly before being poured a basin of ice water from head to toe. Sid looked at me with a bit of confusion in his expression. Looking at his puzzled expression, 3 big flames instantly shot up on top of my head. Sid. I did fall into the sea. But how do you know? I sneered. How do I know? I spent a lot of money to have people search for you in the sea for 3 months. How could I not know? Probably because my expression looked a bit indignant and sad. Sid frowned and explained. I did have a car accident and fall into the sea back then. But later I was rescued. Do you mean this child is mine? I have no memory of this. This is really unbelievable. I reached out and touched Sid's head. And he didn't dodge. Did water get into his brain and he lost his memory? So Key really isn't your biological child? Sid's eyes were filled with hesitation and confusion. I put my hand to my forehead and almost jumped in anger. I've only had you as a boyfriend. Where would I get a son? Under my angry glare, Sid actually raised the corners of his mouth. This was the first time I'd seen him smile since we reunited. The image of Sid smiling with his eyes full of tenderness as he rubbed my hair 3 years ago came to mind again. Darling. Wait for me at home. The milk powder he drinks is on the cabinet. What you like is in the refrigerator. Wait for me to come back and explain to you. Key, who was only 2 years old, was drooling in my arms and babbling. Becoming a stepmother by accident. Looking at Sid's smiling face again, I had a mixture of love and hate. I simply turned my face away. In short, this is your child. You have to recognize him. I don't know who you had him with. When I said this, why did my heart feel so sour? Sid thought for half an hour and still couldn't remember coming back to find me after he finished his military service. Just when I was about to look disappointed, my child called me in a milky voice. Mommy, I'm hungry. Before I could react, Sid naturally took out a small bread from the car and handed it over. He didn't forget to tear open the packaging. I looked at it with a dazed expression. Sid looked at the packaging paper in his hand and seemed even more at a loss than me. This guy used to dislike children the most. Now, even if he has lost his memory, when it comes to taking care of Key, he still has muscle memory. Obviously, when it comes to taking care of Key, he does it with actions. Back then, when Sid just had an accident, I found it hard to accept being a sucker. But Key was so cute. When I was so sad that I got seriously ill, he tottered and held warm water and handed it to my bedside. When I woke up at night, he pitifully huddled by my feet and never left. If these weren't enough, then all my defenses collapsed at the moment he called me, Mummy, in a milky voice. What sucker or not? The child is the most innocent. After all, this is the only bloodline left by Sid. Bloodline. My eyes lit up and I was a little excited. Key and Sid both looked at me. Although I love Key very much. But you must recognize your child. If you've lost your memory, go do a test. Sid frowned slightly. What if it's not? What should I do? Not. How could it not be? If it's not, I'll give birth to 8 biological ones for you. Come on. Let's go to the hospital. When we came out of the hospital, Sid seemed to be in a very good mood. The results will come out in 3 days. Don't forget what you just said. I was a little dazed. What did I say just now? having raised his precious son for 3 years. I took his car home with a clear conscience. However, after getting off the car, there was another sound of a door closing behind me. My child and I turned around in unison, only to see Sid following up casually. I pursed my lips. Is there something else? Cultivate feelings with my son. Sid said it with confidence and picked up key and walked in front of me. I wanted to shut Sid out. But this reason was really hard to refuse, especially seeing the big smile on my dear son's face. When we got home, Sid really accompanied the child and played well. I sat by the sofa and watched the father and son playing with toys. The corners of my mouth unconsciously rose. My dear son didn't say anything but understood everything. Every time, after kindergarten, he would look enviously at those children who could ride on their father's necks. After playing for an hour, my dear son actually held Sid's hand and fell asleep on the carpet. I whispered, "Take him to the bedroom." Sid followed behind me carrying the child. However, as soon as I entered the bedroom, I regretted it. On the bedside table, the photos of me and Sid were still brightly displayed there. There were photos from our school days and when he came back from the army. When Sid saw them, his body also stiff and obviously, put the child down quickly. I blocked Sid's sight with my body, but my cheeks couldn't help but turn red. These photos were the biggest motivation that supported me until now. Before leaving the bedroom, Sid took a deep look at the photos again. I coughed softly and explained in a low voice. He was looking for his father. I had no choice but to put up a few photos. He misses you. Under Sid's burning gaze, I really wanted to escape. However, as soon as I took a step, Sid pulled me back. I involuntarily leaned back. The back that should have hit the wall leaned against Sid's arm. The arm protecting my back slowly moved down and finally stopped at my waist. My cheeks were so red that they could bleed. There seemed to be a little deer running around wildly in my heart. I pretended to be fierce. What are you doing? Sid looked down at me. There was tenderness in his eyes again. His voice was low and seemed to be mixed with a hint of grievance. Only the sun misses me. What about you? Sid was very close to me. So close that I could clearly smell the faint fragrance on his body. I bit my cheek and pressed my hands tightly against his shoulders. Only my mouth was the toughest all over my body. We've already broken up. Why should I miss you? The tenderness in Sid's eyes froze. Rana. While he was in a daze, I broke free from Sid's hold and distanced myself from him. You. Don't misunderstand. 3 days haven't passed yet. When the results come out, I will contact you. I faced the glass, leaving only my back to Sid. Sid's appearance was reflected on the glass. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something but stopped. His thin lips parted slightly but finally he let out a long sigh. After Sid left, I sat on the sofa and rubbed my hair, feeling annoyed. I had indeed been waiting for this man for a long time. But when he suddenly appeared, I was only caught off guard. I even regretted it a little. After taking him to do the test, what if he took Key away? And that car accident back then, I always felt it was a bit strange. That night, my best friend came to accompany me and drink to relieve my worries. Rana, it's obvious that Sid still wants to make up with you. So what if he's lost his memory? The throbbing in his heart for you will never change. That's true. I didn't care about Sid's amnesia. But I always felt that the matter of falling into the sea in that car accident wasn't so simple. I'm afraid that kind of thing will happen a second time. Last time, I managed to hold on with great difficulty. What if that kind of thing happens again in the future? Now my best friend was also silent. That car accident was very strange. The car was almost completely wrecked. There was only a pool of blood on the driver's seat. The accident happened on a mountain road, and below was an unfathomable sea. The police only told me that Sid fell down after the accident. I wanted to check the surveillance camera, but coincidentally, the surveillance camera was broken that day. Even Sid's dashcam couldn't be found. I still had 100 mysteries in my heart about what happened back then. But now Sid has lost his memory and can't remember. When I went to sleep at night, my dreams were all about the scene of the car accident back then. Sid was gone, leaving me only in a mess. I was in a daze and didn't know how long I had slept. When I woke up the next day, what I saw were Sid and Key. "Why are you?" As soon as I opened my mouth, my throat hurt so much that it almost killed me. A fit of coughing almost made me unable to catch my breath. Sid frowned and handed me a glass of warm water. "Don't talk for now. Drink some water." I wanted to sit up, but I didn't have any strength at all. My dear son took the water glass. Sid directly helped me sit up. Feeling the strong chest tightly against my back. My face became even hotter. "Mummy, you had a fever after drinking with Auntie. Drink some water quickly." Key held the water glass to my mouth. These father and son cooperated quite well. After a few sips of warm water, my throat finally felt better. "Why are you here?" My dear son answered even faster. "Auntie called." "Thank you very much, my good best friend. How come you have a fever just like that?" I smacked my lips and didn't speak. "Isn't it all because of you?" I got angry and got a fever. That period after Sid's car accident was a nightmare that I didn't even dare to think about. With a dizzy head, I curled up into the quilt. I don't know how long it was later when suddenly there was a phone call. The results were out. "I'll go get it. You rest well." When Sid was gone, I looked at my dear son and had a complex mix of emotions. Don't really take my son away. Woo. However, half an hour later, I realized that this worry seemed a bit unnecessary. Sid came back with a cold expression. The fingertips holding those 2 pieces of paper were so forceful that they turned a little white. I struggled to prop myself up on my arm. I wanted to show off but couldn't anymore. I didn't. Cough. Didn't I lie to you? After taking a deep breath, Sid rubbed my child's head. "Key, can you finish assembling last night's Lego and show it to Mummy?" I frowned slightly. The moment Key closed the door, Sid approached me with a cold face. "You. Show me the results." On the paternity test were several big words clearly written. "No blood relationship." Me. What? Key is neither mine or Sid's. Then whose child have I been raising all these years? Rana. Are you sure Key isn't yours? I supported my dizzy head with one hand and raised the other to swear. Impossible. If it's mine, then you fall into the sea again. After all, growing up, nothing was more unacceptable to me than Sid falling into the sea. "Sid." He took a deep breath and finally asked helplessly. "Then where did you get that child?" I shrank my shoulders. "I thought it was your son with another woman." Sid raised an eyebrow. His eyes filled with helplessness. "And you still raised him until now?" I pursed my lips and had nothing to refute. How could I explain my love-struck behavior? Treating Key as Sid's only bloodline in this world and raising him? And still raising him so cute, chubby and white? Thinking I was really dead and keeping a memory? Sid helped me straighten the quilt, his tone slightly rising. I blushed and quickly turned over and hid my cheek in the quilt. After Sid chuckled, he fell silent. Just when I was about to fall asleep in a daze, he stroked my hair and spoke softly. "So, all these years you raised that little guy alone?" Sleepiness overcame me and I didn't speak. But the person beside me wouldn't let it go and even shook me. "Rana." "Huh?" I was impatiently asked and glared back at him and muttered. "Otherwise? Who would be with me with my ex's son?" I don't know if I was seeing things because of my sleepy eyes. Sid seemed to be stunned for a moment, and the hand stroking my hair also paused. My body was burning hot. Before I could think too much, I fell asleep in a daze. But vaguely, it seemed that there was always a cool towel wiping on my body. There also seemed to be a softness on my lips. Sweet. When I woke up again, it was already dark. When I saw the man by the bed, my action of rubbing my eyes paused. "Awake? Have you been here the whole time?" When I saw the basin and towel on the ground, I understood. Sid didn't answer but instead took out a thermometer. Take your temperature. I hadn't recovered from the shock yet. So Sid was really helping me reduce fever physically just now? Then that softness on the lips. I subconsciously touched my mouth. However, when Sid saw that I didn't move, he reached out and picked me up and stuffed a thermometer. I blushed and dodged. I'll do it myself. Sid's burning gaze left me nowhere to hide. Fortunately, there was no light on in the room, so I could hide my burning cheeks in the night. 37. There's still a little heat. I avoided Sid's gaze and changed the topic. It's getting late. Thank you so much today. Otherwise, you go back first? After all, the paternity test results are out. This guy isn't the biological father of my child. Sid didn't speak but instead pointed at the high moon outside the window. Do you know what time it is now? Huh? Sid handed me his phone. When I opened it, it was early morning. Sid looked at me with his arms crossed, with an expression of "you're so heartless." I scratched my head sheepishly. I was confused from the fever and slept in a daze. It's really not appropriate to drive someone away at this time. But I don't have an extra room at home. Sid sat straight on the chair. I hesitated and said, otherwise, you go and be with Key. In the night. Sid changed his position. You're not well yet. Go back to sleep. Don't worry about me. Can't sleep? Have something to eat? I wanted to sleep, but my stomach growled embarrassingly. My old face blushed. Sid chuckled. Wait. I'll make you something to eat. Sid told me to lie still. But when the fragrance wafted in, I still went to the living room with saliva, looking at Sid's back as he cooked. My nose soured as if I were back in our love days. At that time, I couldn't cook yet. But every time Sid cooked, I would run behind him and wrap my arms around his waist. I had hugged him many times. But every time I hugged him, Sid would still stiffen. Rana, if you make trouble again, I'll deal with you. I smiled and rubbed my cheek on his back. Sid had no choice but to blush at the tip of his ears and gently poke my forehead. Why did you get up? Sid waved his hand in front of my eyes. No more discomfort. Coming to my senses. I lowered my head and rubbed my sour eyes. No matter how sweet the past was, he couldn't remember it anymore. I've been lying down for too long, and my body is stiff. What are you making? I avoided Sid's gaze and walked towards the kitchen. The beef noodle was still bubbling in the pot. Very fragrant. By the way, the stepmother, remembered belatedly. Key has eaten already. Sid didn't know when he walked behind me. I turned around suddenly, and was facing his chest. There was a stove behind me and I couldn't avoid it. The broken hair on my forehead was messy. Sid naturally helped me straighten it. For a moment, I even had an illusion. This seemed to be still the days 3 years ago. Sid leaned slightly forward. The warm breath fell on my neck. His dark eyes looked at me without blinking. Rana. My already somewhat hot body became even hotter. I blushed and wanted to dodge but was held around the waist by him. You. I glared at him shyly. Men and women should not be too intimate. I'm not your girlfriend now. Don't take advantage of me. Sid was calm. His gaze lightly swept over me, and then fell on the stove. There's fire behind me. So embarrassing. The little deer in my heart started to run around for no reason. My heart was in a mess. After Sid washed the dishes, he watched me lie back in the quilt. Are you going to sit here all night? Sid straight in his back. It's okay. You have a good rest. I turned over and covered myself with the quilt. Sleep. But why are my eyes so disobedient? I just can't control myself from glancing at Sid. After half an hour, I sat up in annoyance, looking at Sid's figure in the night. I awkwardly moved to the other side. If you collapse from exhaustion, I'll be blamed. Otherwise, you come up and make do for a while. Before I could finish speaking, the man sitting on the chair had already got on the bed. Me. I turned my back to Sid but felt uncomfortable no matter how I lay. When I wanted to turn over for I don't know how many times, Sid put his big hand on me. Can't sleep? Otherwise. Do something we love? You said if Key wasn't my biological child, you'd give me a biological one? Me. My body stiffened in an instant. Sleep. This sleep was unexpectedly solid. But the next day, I was woken up by my dear son's exclamation. Mommy, why are you sleeping with the instructor? The teacher said that only when a man and a woman are married can they sleep together. You. My dear son's cheeks flushed with anger as he spoke. I guess if it wasn't for the intimidation of the instructor, my son would have rushed up to hit someone. Key. Don't. The instructor was just taking care of Mummy last night. Just staying by Mummy? Mummy just let him sleep here for one night. I was anxious to get up and explain but couldn't. Looking back, I found that my tin hands were still tightly wrapped around Sid's neck. Goodness. There's no way to explain. My dear son went back to the bedroom, looking at his indignant back. I wanted to cry. Primary school teachers. Why teach this so well? Aha. Little. I was afraid that my dear son would be sad and wanted to chase after him. But without paying attention, I was held by Sid's arm and pressed under him. My hands were placed above my head. What? What are you doing? I was anxious. What if the child sees it again later? Sid had a smile on his lips. There was a hint of slyness in his dark eyes. Key said that only couples can sleep together. You invited me last night. Don't you want to take responsibility? I didn't want to answer. But obviously, this guy had a way to deal with me. His voice rose. Key. Your mummy. Me. I quickly covered his mouth. Take responsibility. Can't I take responsibility? The smile in Sid's eyes grew even bigger. I tentatively let go of Sid's mouth, feeling ashamed and angry. Don't go back on your word. Today is Friday. Auspicious day. Let's go get the marriage certificate. Sid sat up and pecked me on the lips and then went to explain to Key. I sat dazed lie on the bed. Did I just sell myself like this? But Sid still has amnesia. I rubbed my messy hair. He tricked me once 3 years ago. Should I run away once 3 years later? However, before I could think it through, my dear son changed and pulled Sid and stood at the door. Mummy, why haven't you gotten up to get married? Me. My dear son was eating a lollipop and looked a little guilty. The instructor said that he wants me to be a flower boy and personally send Mommy to get married. Just this. This is something that other children can't do. I twitched the corner of my mouth and looked at Sid. This guy had one hand on my dear son's shoulder and his eyes were full of pride. Those who didn't know would think he had won a great victory. Under the urging of the two men at home, we really arrived at the gate of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Sid unbuckled my seat belt for me. It's just one step away. There's no use regretting now. I tightly held my household register and still asked out the doubt in my heart. Do you really not remember what happened 3 years ago? The sparkle in Sid's eyes dimmed a little. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. I can't remember what happened 3 years ago. But I've always had you in my heart. Even if I can't remember what happened 3 years ago, I can guess roughly. I should have come to make up with you back then. Right? I will use every day in the future to fill in the missing 3 years. Okay? The sunlight shone on Sid's cheek through the car window. There was only tenderness left on his stern face. My eyes reddened. Okay. With love struck on my mind, I walked even faster than Sid. But when I sat in front of the staff, I suddenly remembered. Sid and I, strictly speaking, seemed to already be husband and wife. The staff operated for a while and looked at us. Divorce is next door. Embarrassing. I quickly apologized and pulled him away. There had been one thing after another during this period. I had forgotten that Sid had already proposed to me 3 years ago. There was a big dine and ring back then. I was afraid of being touched by the scene, and had not dared to wear it these 3 years. On the way back, Sid gritted his teeth. Did you also lose your memory? I guiltily turned my head and looked out the window and didn't dare to answer. I should have not held back this morning. The speed of the car obviously increased. I blushed and tightened my seat belt. Just when I was about to speak, I saw a large truck speeding towards us from the rearview mirror. It was about to hit us, but there was no sign of slowing down at all. Sid, there's a car behind. Beep beep. There was a burst of piercing honking sounds around. After a spin, everything went black before my eyes and I fainted. It seemed that I had a very long dream. The cry of my child kept echoing in my ears. When I woke up again, it was already 2 days later. My dear son's nose and eyes were red. He was excitedly jumping up and down. Sid's arm and forehead were wrapped in bandages. Mommy, you finally woke up. I wanted to touch my child's head, but my body ached so much that I gasped. Don't move yet. Sid looked at me with concern in his eyes. His eyes were slightly red. What happened? Wife. I've implicated you. Sid, regardless of the presence of nurses in the ward, got up and kissed me on the forehead. I stared at him in a daze. When I saw the complicated look in his eyes, my eyes became sour. Did you? Sid nodded and kissed the back of my hand. Yes. I remembered everything. Wife. I remembered. Tears fell uncontrollably. The grievances and longing of these 3 years completely broke down at this moment. After I cried bitterly, I found that the nurse in the ward was also wiping tears. I was embarrassed and blushed. I quickly cleared my throat. Behave properly. Okay. The little nurse still had a nasal tone when she spoke. Your husband is more seriously injured than you. After waking up, he insisted on staying here and guarding you. When the ambulance took you guys, I was also there. The car was hit and spun several times. Your husband managed to adjust the direction and hit his side on the guardrail. You two have become a legendary story in the hospital. I looked at Sid in surprise. The bandage on his head, the plaster on his arm, and his leg. I'm fine. Just a little injury. Hey. Lie down properly. Oh, I threw myself into Sid's arms with tears streaming down. Even though I was extremely careful, it still hurt him so much that he gasped. During hospitalization, Sid would always go out with a gloomy face. After several times, I finally couldn't hold back anymore. What was that car accident 3 years ago about? Sid was silent for a long time before answering. In fact, he is the son of my comrade in arms. I raised an eyebrow. Comrade in arms? Sid nodded. He was killed 3 years ago. His wife was also persecuted and disappeared. Only Key was left. After I came back, I collected evidence and sent those people in. After confirming it was safe, I went to find you. But I was so careful yet still missed a mastermind. I was shocked as I listened. In a society ruled by law, there could still be such things. Could it be the one who hit us this time? Sid held my hand, his eyes full of guilt, and I was so angry that my fingertips were trembling. That bad guy deliberately hit Sid 3 years ago and threw him into the sea. And 3 years later, he actually used the same trick again? What about now? Sid looked up with a determined look in his eyes. Already sent the person in. 2 acts of premeditated murder are enough for him to stay in prison for life. Wife, don't worry. This time I will definitely protect you and Key. Sid and I interlocked our fingers, and I finally managed to calm down. It turns out that there are really extremely vicious people in this world. 2 months later, Sid and I watched that person being sentenced to life imprisonment with our own eyes. The big stone hanging over my heart finally fell to the ground. Sid held the child in one arm and pulled me with the other as we went home. This can also be considered as an explanation to Key's parents. Let's go home. I suddenly stopped. Sid turned around and looked at me. What's wrong? You hold Key in one hand and hold me with the other. What about the one in my belly later? Sid was stunned. Key climbed down from Sid's arms and kicked his legs. Then he surprisingly pressed his ear against my stomach and listened. In the future, I'll hold my sister. Daddy holds Mummy. I suppressed the rising corner of my mouth and patted Sid, who was stunned. I'm pregnant.